Story 1. The PS3 setup. Craigslist was a strange but reliable friend. Over the years, I'd bought and sold all kinds of things on the platform. Furniture, concert tickets, even a used bike. Sure, the site had its quirks, with a mix of sketchy ads and badly written posts. But I'd never had a bad experience. It was the kind of place where you'd expect to find hidden gems if you were willing to dig. So, when my little cousin accidentally fried my PlayStation 3 by spilling Mountain Dew all over it, Craigslist was the first place I turned. I wasn't about to drop hundreds of dollars on a new console. Not with the holidays draining my bank account. I needed a deal, and Craigslist was full of them. Scrolling through listings, I spotted it almost immediately. It sounded almost too good to be true. I clicked on the ad, half expecting to find a catch, but the description seemed legitimate. The seller claimed they were offloading the console to cover rent and wanted it gone that night. Text me if interested, the post concluded, with a number at the bottom. Something about the timing, the urgency, gave me pause. But the idea of snagging a PS3 for just $100 was hard to resist. After a moment of deliberation, I sent a quick text. Hey, I'm interested in the PS3. Is it still available? The reply came within minutes. Yeah, still got it. Can you meet tonight? I asked for the location, and the response was, Old Kmart parking lot. Around 8 p.m. Immediately, a small warning bell went off in my head. The Kmart he mentioned had been closed for years. The parking lot was empty most of the time, a ghostly relic of what used to be a bustling shopping center. Still, I reasoned, people use parking lots for meetups all the time. Maybe he didn't want strangers coming to his house. That made sense, didn't it? I told myself it was fine and agreed to meet. The rest of the evening felt surreal. As I drove to the parking lot, snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, illuminated by my headlights. The streets were quiet, eerily so, and the cold made everything feel sharper, more present. When I arrived, the parking lot was almost completely empty, save for a single car parked at the far end. Its headlights were off, and a man stood leaning against the driver's side door, his hood pulled up against the chill. The sight unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself to stop overthinking. Craigslist wasn't exactly known for polished professionals. This was probably just someone down on their luck, selling what they could to get by. Taking a deep breath, I pulled into a spot a few feet away and rolled down my window. You here for the PS3? The man called out. His voice was low and gravelly, muffled slightly by the scarf wrapped around his face. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. You have it with you? It's in the back, he said, gesturing toward his car. Come check it out. I hesitated. Something about the situation felt off. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact or the fact that he hadn't moved from his spot, as if waiting for me to come closer. Do you mind bringing it over here? I asked, trying to sound casual. The man shook his head. It's easier if you just take a look yourself. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car. The snow crunched under my boots as I approached his vehicle. He stepped aside, motioning to the back seat. The box was there, just as he'd said, with the familiar PS3 logo printed across the top. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I opened the box, my stomach dropped. Inside wasn't a PlayStation 3. It was an old, dusty DVD player. The kind you'd find at a garage sale for a couple of bucks. What the hell is this? I asked, turning to him. That's when I realized how close he'd gotten. Before I could react, he pulled a gun from his waistband and pointed it at my chest. Hand over the cash, he said, his voice steady and cold. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I don't have it, I stammered, trying to buy time. Don't lie to me, he snapped, his finger tightening on the trigger. I'm not asking again. My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket, pulling out the envelope of cash. Slowly, I tossed it into his car. There, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Take it. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Someone was crouched in the driver's seat of his car, watching us intently. Another man, hidden in the shadows, waiting. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a robbery. The man with the gun motioned toward his car door. Get in, he ordered. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to get out of there before things escalated further. Without thinking, I turned and bolted toward my car. Hey, he shouted, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The rear window of my car shattered as I dove inside, glass spraying across the back seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Another shot rang out as I floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the icy pavement. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of how close I'd come to something far worse than losing $100. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face. The cold, detached look in his eyes as he pointed the gun at me. I couldn't stop thinking about the second man, hidden in the shadows. What would have happened if I'd gotten into that car? The thought made my skin crawl. I never reported the incident. What would I even say? I didn't have a license plate number, and I doubted the police would take a Craigslist robbery seriously. Instead, I spent the next few days trying to put it out of my mind. Though the fear lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Since then, I've stayed far away from Craigslist. Some deals aren't worth the risk, no matter how tempting they seem. Story 2. The Smiling Man livestream. It started the way so many late nights do, me idly scrolling through forums, looking for something to pass the time. I wasn't in the mood for movies or games, and my usual social media feed felt stale. Instead, I fell into a rabbit hole of threads about strange and unexplained internet oddities. Most of the posts were the usual fluff, rumors about haunted websites, bizarre YouTube channels, or creepy ARGs. Then, buried deep in the thread, I found it. A single link accompanied by a cryptic caption. Live feed, Smiling Man. Watch if you dare. No other context, no comments, just the link staring at me like a dare. I hesitated. Clicking on random links was risky at best and idiotic at worst. But curiosity has a way of overriding caution. Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked. The page loaded quickly, revealing a live stream in stark, almost surreal clarity. The scene was simple but deeply unsettling. A man sat in the center of an empty room, illuminated by harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. He was staring directly into the camera, his lips stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. His eyes, unblinking and glassy, seemed to follow me no matter where I looked on the screen. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd see in family photos or awkward school pictures. This was something else entirely. A grin too wide, too forced, as though his face had been stretched into position by invisible hands. The corners of his mouth curved upward at an impossible angle, and his teeth gleamed unnaturally white. For a moment, I thought the stream was frozen. The man didn't move a muscle. He just sat there, staring and smiling. I glanced at the chat window beside the video feed. It was empty. No usernames, no messages. Just a blinking cursor waiting for someone to say something. I realized I might be the only person watching. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The man didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't shift in his seat. The room around him was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of static from the audio feed. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this a performance? Some kind of avant-garde art piece? Or was it just a weird looped video designed to creep people out? But then I noticed something. The man's chest was rising and falling ever so slightly. He was breathing. The longer I watched, the more oppressive the silence became. It felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though the room itself were holding its breath. My own breathing grew shallow, matching the rhythm of the man on the screen. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like a footstep on old wooden floorboards. The sound was so soft I thought I might have imagined it. But as I strained to listen, it came again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from my apartment. It was coming from the stream. The man in the chair didn't react. His eyes remained locked on the camera, his smile unchanging. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone, or something, was in the room with him. The creaks continued, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each step. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse quickening. Then I saw it, a shadow flickering across the far wall, just barely visible in the corner of the frame. It moved with a strange, jerky rhythm, like someone pacing back and forth just out of view. The man in the chair didn't flinch. I wanted to say something, to type a warning into the empty chat box, but my fingers froze over the keyboard. It was as though some unspoken rule held me back, a primal instinct telling me to stay silent. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a low, indistinct whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably human, soft, almost conversational, as if the speaker were trying not to be overheard. I glanced at the man in the chair, expecting him to react, but he remained perfectly still, his grin unwavering. Minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. The whispers faded, replaced by a new sound, a metallic scrape, sharp and deliberate, like metal against stone. Then, from the edge of the frame, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette, blurry and distorted by the camera's harsh lighting. But as it stepped into full view, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a black ski mask. In his hands, he held a sledgehammer. He moved cautiously, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't seem to notice the camera, or if he did, He didn't care. The intruder stopped a few feet away from the man in the chair, tilting his head as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face, but there was no response. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The intruder leaned closer, his grip on the sledgehammer tightening. For a moment, it seemed like he was debating whether to use it. Then, everything changed. The smiling man's eyes shifted, just a flicker, a split-second movement that was almost imperceptible. But it was enough. The intruder froze, his body going rigid. Slowly, the man in the chair began to move. It wasn't a natural movement. His limbs jerked and twisted as though pulled by invisible strings. His head tilted sharply to one side, and his grin widened to an impossible degree, the corners of his mouth stretching far beyond what should have been physically possible. The intruder stumbled back, his breathing audible through the stream's audio feed. "What the fuck?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The smiling man's head snapped toward him with a sickening crack, his unblinking eyes locking onto the intruder. The man dropped the sledgehammer and bolted out of frame. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the feed, followed by silence. The smiling man slowly turned back to the camera, his grin as wide and unnatural as ever. I sat there, paralyzed, my hands gripping the edges of my desk. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was the smiling man a victim, a decoy, or something far more sinister? I watched the stream for a few more minutes, hoping for answers, but nothing changed. The man in the chair remained as he had been, still, silent, and smiling. Eventually, I closed the tab. The image of his grotesque grin burned into my mind. The next day, I tried to find the stream again, but the link was gone. No forums mentioned it, and no search terms brought it back. It was as if the entire thing had vanished. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me just as intently as I was watching the stream. Late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows seem to move on their own, I find myself thinking of the smiling man. I'll never know who he was, or why he was there, but one thing is certain: some corners of the internet are best left unexplored. Story 3. The Manipulative Child. It began with a flickering screen. A young father, eager to ensure the safety of his newborn, had recently set up a baby monitor with a video feed. Like any new parent, he used it as a reassurance, proof that his baby was peacefully asleep. But what he saw on that monitor one cold night in 2007 would shatter his sense of security and set off a chain of events that unearthed horrors far beyond anything he could have imagined. Instead of his sleeping baby, the screen displayed something nightmarish. In a dimly lit cellar, a boy no older than 6 or 7 sat trembling on the floor. His small frame was bound with thick ropes, his face streaked with dirt and tears. The surroundings were grim: cold concrete walls, a bare floor, and dim lighting that barely illuminated the scene. The boy's muffled sobs broke through the static, faint but unmistakable. The father froze, unable to look away. His first thought was that the monitor had picked up interference from another device nearby. But that did little to comfort him. If what he was seeing was real, then somewhere close by, a child was suffering unimaginably. His heart pounding, he grabbed his phone and called the police. The authorities arrived quickly, their skepticism giving way to alarm as the father showed in the live feed. With no way to determine the source of the signal, they began canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking questions. Eventually, their search brought them to a nondescript house belonging to 2 sisters, Clara and Katerina Mauirova. Clara, a single mother, lived there with her 2 young sons, Jacob and Andre, as well as a recently adopted 13-year-old girl named Anna. The sisters welcomed the police inside, their smiles strained but polite. When asked about a cellar, Clara hesitated before leading the officers to the kitchen, where a trapdoor lay hidden beneath a faded rug. What the police found when they opened that door would haunt them forever. The cellar was dark, damp, and suffocatingly small, and there, in the corner, was Jacob, bound, gagged, and visibly malnourished. The boy's wide, terrified eyes filled with tears as the officers freed him from his restraints. His skin was pale, his body frail, and he clung to one of the officers as though he were holding on to life itself. The sisters were taken in for questioning, their explanations riddled with contradictions and bizarre justifications. Clara, sobbing and visibly distraught, insisted that Jacob's punishment was necessary. Anna said it was the only way to cleanse him. She explained, her voice cracking. He had to be purified of his sins. Anna, meanwhile, sat quietly in the corner of the interrogation room, her wide eyes filled with innocence. She looked like a frightened child, a victim herself. Clutching a stuffed bear, she gazed at the officers with an expression that was equal parts confusion and fear. The more the sisters talked, the clearer it became that Anna was no ordinary 13-year-old. She's wise beyond her years, Clara said, her voice trembling with conviction. She knows things things I can't understand. We trust her. Under Anna's guidance, the sisters had subjected Jacob and his younger brother Andre to horrific abuse. They were starved, beaten, and restrained for days at a time. Anna had convinced Clara and Katerina that these punishments were acts of divine will, necessary for the boys' salvation. She told us it was the only way to save their souls. Katerina whispered, her voice barely audible. Jacob's testimony painted an even darker picture. Through tears, he recounted how Anna had orchestrated the abuse with chilling precision. But the most horrifying revelation came when Jacob revealed what Anna had done to him. "She cut me," he said, his small voice trembling. "She took pieces of my skin and made him eat it." The investigators were horrified, but their questions about Anna only deepened the mystery. She had been adopted by Clara several months prior, but her paperwork was vague at best. The orphanage listed as her place of origin didn't exist, and no one could provide concrete details about her background. Despite her apparent age, Anna displayed an uncanny ability to manipulate those around her. She spoke with authority and eloquence far beyond her years, often convincing adults to see her as a figure of wisdom rather than a child. As the investigation continued, small inconsistencies in Anna's story began to surface. Her mannerisms, her speech, and even her physical appearance didn't quite match the profile of a 13-year-old girl. And then, during a routine search of the Maui River home, officers found a passport hidden among Anna's belongings. The name on the document wasn't Anna. It was Barbara Skurlova, a 33-year-old woman with a rare medical condition that stunted her physical growth. Barbara wasn't a child at all. Barbara's deception stunned everyone involved. For months, she had lived as Anna, seamlessly integrating herself into the Maui River family and manipulating them into committing unspeakable acts. Further investigation revealed that Barbara had a long history of infiltrating families by posing as a vulnerable child. Her small stature and youthful appearance made it easy for her to gain sympathy and trust. But Barbara's motives were far more sinister than mere manipulation. Police uncovered evidence linking her to a secretive cult known as the Grail Movement, which preached extreme forms of spiritual cleansing and purification. Barbara's role within the cult was unclear, but it was evident that she had used its teachings to justify her actions. The Maui River sisters, desperate for purpose and validation, had fallen completely under Barbara's control. She had preyed on their insecurities, convincing them that their abuse of Jacob and Andre was part of a divine plan. Barbara's arrest sent shockwaves through the community, but her capture was only the beginning of the story. After fleeing the Maui River home, she had traveled to Poland, where she once again posed as a child, this time as a 14-year-old boy named Adam. By the time authorities caught up with her, she had already begun integrating herself into a new family. The realization that Barbara could so easily manipulate her way into another household was chilling. It wasn't just her ability to deceive, it was the precision with which she identified vulnerable people and exploited their weaknesses. Barbara's trial became a media circus, with every gruesome detail of her crimes laid bare for the world to see. But even as she sat in court, her expression remained calm, almost serene. She showed no remorse. Barbara's story is one of the most horrifying and baffling cases of modern times, not just because of the physical and emotional torment she inflicted, but because of what she represents. Her actions force people to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who wear the guise of innocence. We like to think we can spot danger, that we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. But what happens when the danger looks like a child? Barbara Skurlova's story is a reminder that real-life horrors often surpass anything we could imagine in fiction. It's not just the cruelty of her actions that lingers, it's the chilling knowledge that someone like her could be out there, waiting for their next family to prey upon. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made my pulse spike. A passing car, a creak in the house, even the wind against the siding. I was sure they had followed me, that they had seen my license plate, that they knew where I lived. The next morning, I checked my phone, half expecting another text from the seller, but there was nothing. I told myself it was over, that I had escaped, but the paranoia didn't fade. I started double-checking my locks, looking over my shoulder in grocery stores, flinching whenever my phone buzzed. Then, 3 nights later, it happened. A single message, from an unknown number. You got lucky. That was it. No threats, no demands, just those 3 words, sitting in my inbox like a warning. I deleted the message immediately, changed my number the next day, even moved to a new apartment 6 months later. But the fear never really left me. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I see an old, beat-up sedan in my rearview mirror and my breath catches. When I park in an empty lot, I hesitate before getting out, scanning the shadows for movement. And no matter how much time passes, I never buy anything off Craigslist again.